To briefly introduce who you'll be hearing from today, we have Ana Oliveira, who is a remote sensing and geospatial data analyst from Plus Atlantic Collab. Next to her is Kendra McDonald, who is Chief Executive from Canada's Ocean Supercluster. Followed by her is Anya Waite, who is Chief Executive and Scientific Director from Ocean Frontier Institute. Ellie McKay is Chief Executive and founder of Ellipsis Earth. And Sarah Piternette-Gaillarn is Project Director of Blue Cloud. So just to get us started, the plan is I'm going to ask each of our panelists one question, which I'll then ask them to answer in about 5 minutes. Then we'll turn this more into a discussion and a Q&A from the audience and hear questions from you. Thanks. All right, so Ana, let me start with you. Your work has shown that ocean health is to a large degree a societal problem, right? Yeah. And it stems from a lack of recognition of how we're all connected by the ocean, specifically the idea that resource extraction in one location can have teleconnected impacts elsewhere that aren't accounted for. Can you speak briefly about this? What do you think that the pathway is forward?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to the organization. And I'm very glad to be here in a almost all-female panel. So a round of applause for that, please. And so, yes, from the work we have been conducting at the Plus Atlantic Collab, I would say that indeed it's obvious to everyone, and as scientists in particular, the connections that exist between the trigger events and what is the outcome of those. I mean, it's undeniable right now the consequences of climate change and how these are impacting societies globally. But there is a decouple between the space and time in which these events occur and the trigger for them. So we know that emissions since the industrial age come mostly from developed countries, but the consequences of those are happening globally and a lot of times in locations that are underdeveloped. And it is harder for these communities to comply with what they need to do to adapt. On the other side, we do have governments and also the private sector to some extent that is aware of these consequences. It's becoming more proactive in terms of regulation on one side. So this has been seen globally in Europe in particular, which I know better, so I can speak a little bit about it. The regulation is pushing forward the agenda, the green agenda, and make institutions to comply. On the other hand, you have citizens who are also more aware, so they are demanding our regulators to make these more strict regulations. And we also have the opportunity, and this would be like my closure remarks, is to the technical opportunity to comply with these regulations and this demand, because we do have a lot of data today. There are some still missing connections, but we have a lot of data from remote sensing, satellites, which I use in particular, and we are able to connect users and users. For instance, we are working with aquaculture stakeholders or municipalities. They want to tackle a specific hazard, say coastal erosion, say fish growth optimization, and they ask us to say, well, we have this data is in situ, it's very limited, how can we connect this data that we have in situ and foresee in time and space how, for instance, a marine heat wave is coming towards us, and we can use satellite data and numerical models to provide these tailor-made user models, and this helps out in the all value chain, including emissions. So this would be my contribution.
That's really exciting, thanks. And I think we're going to hear a lot about co-development of strategies with stakeholders. Yeah, we'll come back to that with a bunch of questions. Anya, I think I have you next on our list. There's a lot of discussion about what to do with the ocean data we have. Can you speak a little bit to the gaps? Where's the most urgent need for new or alternative types of ocean data?
Did I mess up our mics? Did I mess up Ana and Anya?
It's okay.
It's okay? Okay.
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah. I have a different question for you, though,
Okay.
Kendra. So,
It's
yeah.
all good.
Yeah.
So thanks very much. Am I mic'd? I am. Okay.
Yeah.
That's an important question, I think, because we talk a lot about how to aggregate data, but we don't often talk about where should that data actually be coming from. And what's happened over the last 10 or 20 years is that the researchers, and of course I'm a research institute CEO, and we work with hundreds of researchers to formulate big ideas that can be done better together than as a sum of the parts. So we're really part of this integration discussion. What we're finding is that the traditional oceanographic sampling of the ocean, which took probes and from ships and put them down to 4,000 meters, actually did a pretty good job of getting the three-dimensional and four-dimensional ocean data. Of course, it was sparse, it was limited in time. But what's happened with time is that those measurements have become less numerous, and we've had much more surface measurements. So right now, if you do a plot from sort of the sky to the deep sea of how much data actually exists, it goes exponentially down from vast amounts collected in the atmosphere to almost nothing in the deep sea. And what we're finding, particularly in the net zero discussion, is that it's critical that we actually observe the deep sea well enough to close our carbon budgets. So we're having lots of discussion about blue carbon, these critical blue carbon ecosystems on the coastlines, but it's actually deep blue carbon off the shelf and in the deep sea that holds 80% and sometimes 90% of the carbon and 90% of the heat that's controlling climate change. So if we don't observe the deep sea adequately, we can't actually track towards our climate targets. And so the Ocean Frontier Institute wants to help broker that international dialogue, particularly with nations around the North Atlantic, where we're based, and we'd like to start there because the North Atlantic absorbs 30% of ocean carbon and is one of the critical places that is changing rapidly with the slowing of the Gulf Stream and the melting of the Arctic. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I'd love to hear more about international partnerships so we can be more effective together. Thank you.
Thanks. It's a great point. I mean, I think the statistic that we've heard is 95% of the ocean's floor remain unexplored, right? And so that is driving so many things around the planet, yet it's one of the largest unknown spaces we have. Back to Kendra then. Kendra, Canada's Ocean Supercluster is responsible for driving innovation and growth in the ocean economy. Can you speak a bit about what the opportunities you are seeing for different ocean sectors to work collaboratively? What are the benefits of data sharing among those different stakeholders?
Yeah, so one of the principles of the cluster is really to work collaboratively, and that actually is part of the innovation in the program itself. So we now have a portfolio of about over 80 projects and about 300 collaborators across those projects. And if you actually looked at most of those projects are certainly generating some kind of data. And so the more that we can share and leverage that data, the better decisions that we're going to make and the less that we're duplicating effort. So, I pulled on just a few examples of some of the different models that we're seeing. So one is trying to leverage a technology that applies to data collection from multiple industries. So we have a big project, our Ocean Aware project. It includes the universities, it includes the Government of Canada. It's got shipping, it's got power and energy, as well as aquaculture and fisheries, and they're all looking at different applications of fish tracking. So how do we improve fish health? How do we improve environmental awareness? How do we better understand how fish are moving around subsea structures, for example, so we can make better decisions? On the flip side of that, we're seeing collection of data in a particular place that has relevance to multiple stakeholders. So again, in that example, they are working with fisheries and they're working with energy to be able to collect particular data, and their intent, and we're seeing this more and more, I was just in California at an Ocean Tech show, is data as a service. So how do we look at, because we have some places in the ocean that we have lots of data because people are going over and over and over again and collecting similar data sets. So how do we reduce that? Because the more that we can share that data, the more that we're able to reduce impact. And then how do we generate data for more than one application? Then we've got changes in the way that we are working together. So we've got now ships, for example, one of our collaborators who is willing to put different sensors on the ship, right? So now instead of sending out your own research fleet, you're able to leverage the ship. Obviously, we have several projects with autonomous vehicles where we're putting various sensors to be able to collect data. So how do we work together to be able to leverage the assets that are already on the ocean to be able to collect more data? And they're also willing to help put sensors into the ocean. So again, that ocean access piece. how we collect data. So we have a project that is crowdsourcing data. So they're trying to use citizens to be able to capture wind data in this particular case, to be able to build a more robust data set. Now, it's not getting to the deep ocean challenges that Anya talks about, but it does collect data. And I think the other one, and this is much less about ocean data, but it is about data sharing in our ocean economy. We just signed a memorandum of understanding this morning with Forum Oceano here in Portugal, which we're very excited about. And what we talked about is how do we share data around the startup community and the investor community, because the faster we can connect those up, and the faster we can identify points of collaboration, then we are going to be able to solve these challenges more quickly because we're not duplicating effort. I'll stop there.
Wow, that's incredibly exciting. I don't know how you keep it all straight. That's a lot of projects. Let's move to Ellie. I think we've kind of hovered around this idea of data literacy, and it's often recognized as a major barrier, right, to global ocean data sharing and connectedness. How has Ellipsis Earth confronted this problem? What are some of the major lessons that you've learned from that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So at Ellipsis Earth, we are accelerating the collection of real-world data, automating it. We use high-level, high-tech technology, machine learning, connected multiple platform systems, so that the collection and automation processing of that data is entirely seamless. And we work specifically on environmental pollution. A lot of that is material pollution. The key, most popular topic, of course, is plastic pollution, but we work with lots of different materials so that we can rapidly cover huge areas and identify, map, and treasure hunt trash all over the world, the coastlines and the oceans. And as Kendra said, leveraging existing routes, existing survey opportunities to minimize impact. Every ship out there already has cameras on it. We can use that image recognition technology and automatically map and track the material pollution that they're seeing, as well as doing our own surveys. And so we can do that to massively increase the efficiency of the alternative existing method of data collection, particularly with material pollution being very manual, very labor intensive, potentially dangerous or inaccessible areas. But that generates billions of data points. What do we do with that? Do we just hand our clients a spreadsheet and tell them good luck? Of course not. We work in professional science communication to translate that information. And the thing that we've found at Ellipsis that's really key is that it's not about the two different audiences of you've got the public who need one type of explanation, and then you've got industry insiders, expertise, and stakeholders who need a different type. Actually, what we find is that the key is unifying, using a universal language around data literacy to help multiple different stakeholders access the same information, but take away what they each need from it without being exclusive at all, and without being overwhelming or inaccessible. And so I've literally written down a few points of some of the barriers that we've seen to both, and this is we have seen internally within the industry as well. It's not even so much as discussing the details of the literacy around understanding machine learning and algorithm technology and high-level statistical analysis. That's one conversation. I'm talking about the real basics of understanding the difference between average and mean. Accurate, precise, reliable, robust, statistically representative. Phrases that scientists may understand, but actually, even within different departments, have different meanings. And certainly, people without that scientific background may use falsely or incorrectly in everyday language. A lot of these words are used to mean different things in day-to-day conversation. And so that lack of literacy, that lack of understanding, or the miscommunication with dual understanding between different words, we call them false friends. There are some examples in general language, like an alien species to somebody studying biodiversity means an invasive species. But if they were to publish in the news that an alien species has been discovered in the jungle, we would have some problems. Models as well a model means something very different to a geologist than it does to a computer scientist, than it does to a fashion designer. And so understanding the real basics of the language that we're using and making sure that we're all on the same page is really, really key. In the best case scenario, the misuse of these words around average, precise, robust, representative, means that maybe we come across as misleading, or there's a little bit of scientific elitism, or it's boring or inaccessible to people. In the worst case, it can be extremely damaging. An example from medical technology, I work with colleagues in the medical field who talk about somebody's cancer progressing and the patient misunderstanding the word progress and thinking, great, I'm going to be okay, and not realizing until it's too late that your cancer has progressed is not the right message to be sending. HIV test is positive, you know? So we have to eliminate these languages. What's that got to do with material pollution? My key bugbear is that we use millions of tons of plastic as our metric. Millions of tons is the common metric. A ton of plastic is a completely useless metric. It's like calories of salad versus calories of chocolate. What does it mean? How much does a ton of plastic, how much space does it take up in this auditorium? 10 of these, 15 of these? Are we capable of visualizing 1 million tons of plastic? What if it was polystyrene? It's one of the lightest materials known to man. Think of the volume of a ton of that versus a ton of ghost net or rubber or heavy metal. So what we do at Ellipsis is use comparative metrics that make more sense. Comparative being key because it means that we can look at a beach in Sydney, we can look at the square in Lisbon, we can look at New York, Times Square, and we can say the density of material is X per square meter. But even that might be too much. So we've developed, for example, in some projects we did in Europe last year, we used a key. I'm from London. There's a sort of myth in London that you're never more than 6 feet from a rat. You may have heard of this. And it was used, on the one hand, to kind of conjure up an image of London as being pretty filthy, but on the other side, perhaps a sign of the invisible biodiversity that we have in the city. So we've developed what we call internally our rat map. It's actually the Ellipsis Earth Pollution Index score, which tells you wherever you are standing in the world, or whichever point your boat is in the ocean, you are never more than 30 centimeters from a piece of trash. You're never more than 2 centimeters from a piece of trash. So you can be standing in the center of LA and it's 5 centimeters. You can be in Mumbai and it's 35 centimeters. And that allows us to instantly understand and know comparatively, relatively, where we all stand in terms of, you know, which rivers we need to focus on, which coastlines we need to focus on. And that can be broken down by aluminium can, Coca-Cola bottle, by brand, can be types of fishing nets. It can be really, really granular. So it's not just about the ability to rapidly collect 1 billion data points. That's amazing. I'm really proud of our technology that we can cover huge areas of coastline and ocean really quickly. But what we do with it, how we translate it, and how we present it to multiple stakeholders, they can also take from that, we tell them the recycling value, which is useful for the local councils. It's literally a treasure map. There's $95,000 worth of aluminium on this beach. We can tell them in terms of tons, environmental impact, how many millions of years of damage there is in different parts of the ocean, so that they can target their interventions more effectively. So my kind of key message there is that we've got to think of literacy from really, really basic points, but then we also need to work backwards from the metrics that the stakeholders want to understand and are most useful for them, and work backwards from that when designing how we present our survey results.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Sarah, you are working on the Blue Cloud 2026 initiative as part of the broader European Fair Marine Digital Knowledge Ecosystem, if I have that right. Can you speak a little bit about data federations in general and this specific example about how they can not only benefit the scientific community, but inform policymaking, which I think connects what everyone else here is saying.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Yes, let me do a step back. So I represent a distributed infrastructure, so an effort of a team of research entities in Europe in particular. So I'm more from the research side of the panel. We started in 2019, but actually there is an history of at least 10 years of collaboration before. They started building an open science platform. which combines both the analytical solutions, so the software, the computing resources, and the data sets to do research on seas and inland waters. The approach that the consortium that started with 20 organizations in Europe and now counts 40 institutes was innovative in the sense that exactly since we are talking about collaboration, we are talking about the power of the data, we understood that the joint efforts would have been those that would have made the difference. So by combining the resources, the software, the computing resources with the data, the users, the researchers, because our users so far are research teams, could have had a space where to find all the necessary information and then combine them to do additional experiments. The data federation approach consists in the fact that we have brought together the data providers, the data aggregators, so those public research institutes in Europe so far, but maybe we are also going far abroad, that gather the data through different systems, from satellite data, in situ data, GLADES, whatever, bring them together, force them to harmonize the way that they mine the data and move from the raw data to the data products. Pull that together and make them accessible through a dashboard to the users in the Blue Cloud framework. We talk about 10 million data sets. From there, building this framework, the step to respond to policy needs and societal needs is really close. The project was funded by the European Commission, looking at two major policies in Europe. One is the open science policy that is pushing for open access to any, not just the data, but in the software for reuse and interoperability solutions, and what we call the digital twins, and in this case, digital twins of the oceans, so to allow real-time digital replications of what's happening on Earth or in the ocean. The project fits, let's say, responds to at least four main programs of the European Commission, in particular the region I represent, of course. So on one side, the data spaces program. So the European Union is really trying to shape this concept of data spaces, which of course will never be a room where everything is accessible, but it's really a matter of interoperability and reuse of data across different providers to make them harmonized. Then the Green Deal, of course, so the response to the big challenges we're facing today, and that's where Blue Cloud fits. But then we also have I mentioned the open science, and then last but of course not least, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I have here a set of examples of end usages of the platform. We've brought in research communities that have developed virtual labs, laboratories, on the platform. They had the data, they had the software, they brought in additional software, modeling tools, other solutions to shape their experiments. In this phase, you're even going beyond, because since we've talked about the importance of accessing data that can be used by machines, of course, then and to give them to Ellie, that helps us understanding what to do with them. The project is in the second phase is also producing packages of data sets on essential ocean variables of the ocean to then be sent back to those data aggregators, for those who are familiar, EMODNET, Copernicus in Europe, Argo, or whatever, to be reused as continuous data products that can complement the studies that Anna is doing on aquaculture, that can complement possibly the analysis that in Canada they're trying to do on some specific area, exactly because they can be replicable and to be repeated. What Ellie, Ellie, yes, refer to in terms of ways of interpret language. I mean, the usage of the data. Their researchers talk in terms of fairness, so findability, accessibility, reusability, and interoperability of the data sets. And that's the value that we bring in.
Great. Thank you all so much. I think you can see why The Economist brought these incredibly talented people here to meet with you today. Let me open up the floor to questions, because I'm sure that we have a number of questions from the floor, and people are circulating with microphones. If you could please just wait till you get a microphone. One here. And please identify yourself when you ask a question too, please.
Hello. Hello.
Here we go.
Hi, my name is Tom Dignas. I'm a geological oceanographer from a great part of Massachusetts, Cape Cod. My question today is largely directed, I think, towards Anya. I'm just down the hall from Woods Hole and MBL there. So we go out on the ocean a lot. But particularly resonant was your comment about that inverse correlation of data collection as we get deeper and deeper. I wonder how you think we might incentivize and identify those people who need to be incentivized to collect that deep ocean and seabed data, as I'm sure some of the people attending this conference are thinking about seabed minings in various parts around the world. You said 30%, I think 30+% of the world, of the ocean carbon goes into just the North Atlantic. Well, that's an interesting issue. What happens when we start disturbing that environment, those ecosystems that we know so very little about and are so critical in terms of thermal transport and world deep circulation? Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a really good one. I think the way to do this is, first of all, to have the international discussion, to bring together people to say, where are the big gaps in ocean data, and get some sort of consensual agreement on where to go. And one way you asked about both agreement and its incentives. I think the big incentive really here is marine carbon dioxide reduction. So there, as many in this room will probably know, a nascent industry struggling for credibility at this point, as are all carbon credits. And I think it's absolutely critical that if we're going to start to save the world through carbon dioxide reduction in the ocean, that we understand the deep ocean well enough to do that. And we need to do that through excellent research, through strong collaboration with industry and other actors, and also with the consensus of our governments. One of the things that we don't hear very often in the industry conversation is the intergovernmental collaborations that have actually been active in the space for a long time and have now, for the first time in the last couple of years, actually allowed ocean fertilization and ocean alkalinity enhancement as they've opened up the London Convention, which is basically the anti-dumping convention that we used to bump up against a lot. And now they have removed that consensually so that we can move towards testing the efficacy and validity of marine carbon dioxide reduction. So I think that is the incentive. But to get that right, you need really full buy-in from the research community, from industry, and from government. And that's where these international partnerships and the data are going to be critical. And to motivate, we need to get the language right, and we need to be able to pitch these ideas with clear synthesis and bring people on board, so that you have someone in Switzerland who understands that the deep ocean is saving them from climate change.
Right. So anybody else like to weigh in on this?
Maybe the only thing I can comment on, something that actually Kendra mentioned, is the data as a service. In Blue Cloud, we try to call our model as a commodity, in the sense, ideally, and that's why we support, of course, the public investments the Commission is doing, the European Commission is doing on that. Accessibility to data should be, and we hope will be always, supported. Then, of course, there are many actors that can complement the difference. So the industry, the citizen science, the different is the quality of the data, the capability to really make them interoperable, reusable, testing back. But I mean, it doesn't mean that they cannot complement the variables that are essential for ocean that comes from a public model.
Yeah, thanks. Other questions? I don't know who's, I think I'm seeing somebody with a mic. Thanks.
Hello.
Yep.
My name is Katerina. I work as data manager for the Red Sea Global's Department of Environment and Sustainability. And I'm wondering if any of you have any good ideas for convincing private organizations into data sharing when there's concerns about public IP and their own other perceptions about them as organizations.
Yeah, I mean, we are. So when I started in this role 5 years ago, I mean, one of the keys to success of the supercluster is actually data sharing. How do we encourage more data sharing? And I was at the North Atlantic UN Decade Workshop, and that was one of the concerns from industry and frustrations from the public sector is we know there's this data and these data sets that exist, and so how do we encourage more sharing? Part of it is a lot of education. So we actually have one of our projects that goes around and educates industry on the benefits of how they can get more out of their data by sharing it than by keeping it. But we've got a lot of work to do there. And so there is still a view that the more that you can keep your data to yourself, the more that you're creating a strategic competitive advantage as a result. So one of the things that we've been working with, so we have CEUS, which is our Canadian Integrated Ocean Observation System. Their mandate in general is open data, but can we create a model where some of the data can be protected, but we can at least start getting it into the registry and then create models for being able to share it. The other reality is in some contracts, they can't share the data. So how do we actually help even with education in terms of you're protecting a data set that you don't necessarily care about for 50 years, but you've put in your terms and conditions the fact that that data can never be shared. So can we really look at by data set what truly needs to be protected, what requires the confidentiality and privacy levels. And so for our projects, we really force, part of what we do is try to grow the ecosystem, really challenge the projects that are generating data to think about what data sets they could share with the public so that the ecosystem can get strengthened and build off that data instead of having to recreate the same thing. So I don't have a magic bullet. A lot of conversations and awareness raising still to be done.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to add
Yeah.
something as well. So at least on our side at the Collab, we have been on a journey to talk with the end users. And one thing that I think shifts the mindset for them is when we offer predictive capacity when in turn for the data. So for instance, I mentioned the aquaculture case study. They freely offer themselves to provide us the in situ sea surface temperature data in return for predictive capacity, which they don't have. So as long as we offer them something in return that is of added value for them, and in this case they want forecasting capacity, they are willing to change that data to us, to share it.
Great. Anya?
Yeah, just building on Anna's point, I like to say the differences between having a data in a teacup and a river flowing by. And to get people away from thinking about a data set and move on to thinking about data flows. Because data flows can be channeled, can be modeled, can be understood as in the broader picture. And so if you tell someone their data flow can be harnessed to solve this problem, it's a mind click, and once they step through that threshold, they never go back to thinking about this little tiny data set on their Excel spreadsheet. And it's exactly then, if on top of that you can offer the sort of services that Anna was talking about, where you're saying, oh, and I can help you channel your data flow into an information flow that can serve your company or your government in perpetuity, then you've really nailed it.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Just to confirm that that is definitely true and works, because we've had several clients who we've used that language. And you mention any predictive technology. We do a lot of predictive work with our models. And they switch from the default of data protection to that real public sharing and that stakeholder engagement. And they see the value instantly. And it's a really small change. But yeah, that needs to be you need to be aware of that at the contract stage, at the partnership formation stage, and then you're good to go. Yeah, it makes a big difference.
One last comment as we think about, so we have so many companies that want to do artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is fed by data. Digital twins are fed by data. Very quickly, they bump up against the fact that they don't have enough of their own data to be able to build the sophisticated models and algorithms they're trying to build. And so that brings it very quickly back to the flow conversation. Where are you going to get the other data? What are the gaps in the data? And so I think we'll continue to see more of that because there's such a desire for artificial intelligence, which is really sophisticated data.
And I don't know if I'm allowed to add or not, but from the scientific viewpoint, a crucial part is the form of the data to use in those predictive models. So Ellie spoke of average data. Well, it turns out from a biological perspective, average data doesn't tell you a lot in terms of predictability, but the raw data do. And so knowing what forms of data and what resolutions is absolutely key for those forecasting parts as well. So I think I saw another question over here.
Hi there. Hi there, yeah, it is. Alex Rogers, I'm Science Director of RevOcean. I've got two interrelated questions, I guess. First of all, we're seeing a huge revolution in oceanographic data gathering at the moment, so big spread of autonomous platforms, new sensors, quantum sensors, biosensors, et cetera, et cetera. So I think soon we're going to be drowning in data.
Yep.
So my first question is, how do we reconcile data gathered using old technologies versus data gathered using these new technologies? And I think part of the answer to that is going to have to be engagement between science communities and data communities represented by you. And then I think a related question to that is that any new technology is not going to reach its full potential without bringing the community along with it. And I'd just be really interested to hear your points of view on how you actually bring the science and other communities along with this sort of revolution in data and digitization of data to really produce maximum impact.
Great question. Who wants to tackle that one?
I can start. I mean,
Please,
I can provide our example. So I'm not a data scientist. I'm not an IT engineer. But what I've learned is that if we want data to be used, the only way is to mine them in a fair way. So ensuring that metadata are available, that formats are interoperable, that can be reused and archived and preserved across years and then reused. So that's why research is still fundamental in this field. And I mean, the dream will be probably to teach also non-research teams on how to provide the data or have a magic software that take the raw data and split them into metadata formats or machine actionable compliant one. Of course, it doesn't happen, but that's why engaging again at the entry level is fundamental, and that's what also these aggregators are doing. And the second question, I can only bring in our example. So with the data set provided and the software and the computing resources all in one place, I mean, if a user, even a private one, has, of course, with software skills and of course has the framework and the background information and data, adding on top other solutions shouldn't either be a limit or a problem, but should complement. And in this way, as Anya was mentioning, if you have a flow, for instance, of data, it will be easier to add on top of that your application to study what you need to get your data for your business. So it shouldn't be. It should be doable actually, and that's what we have tested. I mean, with the applications we have.
To touch on your comment about we're soon going to be overwhelmed by data and drowning in it, and we kind of, to some degree, already are in some areas, and then still very lacking in others. Plastic pollution, we don't know when 99% of it is in the ocean. That's pretty poor. But the key there is, it's cliche, but quality, not quantity, because we can have all of these sensors and we can have all these billions of data points, but if they're not in the right format or we're not doing the right thing with them, then we are going to just be overwhelmed and drown. And how on earth do you sell that to people or engage in that? And we could be monitoring the entire ocean 24/7 at huge cost. But unless we've defined our research question, and unless we understand the outputs that are required, then there's going to be a lot of wasted data capture. So I think the key in these aggregated platforms and the ability to be able to share is to make sure that we are not just going out with all these new technologies and covering the planet because we want to and it's fun, but really focusing on the key quantities that we need. And as you were saying, that the sophisticated algorithms, of course, they need really good data, and they're only as good as the quality that you put in. So we've got to focus on the quality of that, which is why the citizen science projects are amazing from an educational engagement point of view, but they have a limit in terms of their scientific use because of the quality, bad data in is bad data out, etc. So I think it's a combination of focusing on really specifically quantifying exactly what we need, and then ensuring that that is the highest quality input to get the best resolution out.
Yeah, I agree. But I also think there's another thing. Beautiful visuals and excellent communication can go a long way. And we can get those now through the kind of work that my colleagues are doing. And I was really struck by the other day, got a phone call from the southwest coast of Nova Scotia, a fishing village, and one of the fishers said, "I want some of the data you guys have." And I said, I asked myself, well, what does data mean to a Nova Scotia fisher? Well, he had seen a plot on our website, got super excited about that he could see where heat and cold and salt and non-salty were, and wanted some of that data. So just that one outreach and getting the imagination going, and for the scientists, for the researchers, getting those visuals to turn into a new sort of exploration, which is taking these data to a whole new place in 3, 4, 5 dimensions, data clusters, beautiful new ways to see and visualize. I think that gets my blood pumping as a scientist. What can I discover now that I couldn't actually discover 5 years ago because we didn't have the data?
And I think, Anna, from an industry perspective, right, if you can give me better information quickly that leads to better decision making, and I can reduce cost or I can increase revenue in some way, I can do my business better. That's what industry cares about. So to Anna's point, if you can make that connection, I'm going to give you more predictive data. I'm going to reduce your maintenance costs because now I can predict when an asset needs to come offline. I'm going to help reduce your footprint and your use of diesel because now I can help tell you where the fish are going to be. Answering those business questions, really framing it in what industry understands in a way that they can understand it quickly.
Yes, and to add to that, you can even use those models and those predictive models if you establish a relationship between, say, marine heat waves and how the fish grow. When you gather climate change scenarios, you can start to produce also scenarios, and that aquaculture fishermen will have information on which they will be based their decisions in terms of investment, because they will see how the species are shifting, how their thermal comfort boundaries are shifting also in latitude, and this informs also in the long term, not only in the short term. So all of that as a useful purpose.
Great. Well, we're almost out of time. So just in the last couple of minutes here, I want to quickly ask each of you, just kind of going down the line, if you could snap your fingers and engage with a stakeholder that up to this point you've had trouble engaging with, either an industry or a group of people, who would that be, and what do you think the barrier is? And I know I haven't tossed this at you before, so this is putting you on the spot. Sarah, do you want to start?
Yeah, but I won't talk really about difficulty in engagement because, as I mentioned, our stakeholder are mainly so far researchers. I'll do an example which maybe links with a question that was asked before. We work with FAO for the project, and FAO is a UN organization, but there are very high limits in terms of open access to the data they have. They worked together with other partners to build a fisheries, a record of fisheries, but of course the data that comes from an international regulations, there are many limits in terms, yes, 1 minute. So I mean, so this was difficult but possible in the way that the product is accessible according to FAO rules to FAO members. So that's the way we coped with a difficult customer.
All right. Ellie.
I mean, I'll say government, local governments and local organizations, we work with them a lot, we work with them really well, but the access to them and the sell-in is more difficult. So when we work with private clients, we work with brands, corporates, fishing industry partners, they see the benefit they already know, so we're not having to educate them on why they should be invested.
All right, we're down to 30 seconds, Anya. Yeah.
We're hoping to launch a major new program on carbon in the North Atlantic. If that happens, we will want researchers and governments, national governments, to connect to make the most of this huge opportunity.
Great. Kendra.
So I'd say to a small business that is thinking about data as a service, figure out what problem you're trying to solve. At the end of the day, it's not about the data, it's being able to connect it to the business problem.
And Anna.
I would say everything related to economists, actually.
All
So
right.
bank,
You're
insurance.
at the right place. Yeah.
That has been the hardest.
All right, and we are exactly at time, so please join me in thanking our panelists.